share my knowledge on the expand operator in RxJs. I think it's one of the most important operators because it's very foundational and it can really open up some interesting doors. So we'll look into what problems it can practically solve, but we'll start by slowly approaching what it does. And I think one important notion is that people who use RxJS often thinks like data streams as sort of trickling down. So it's kind of a one-way stream where we have a source, and then that source emits, and then we maybe map it at some point, and we kind of listen to it. But what sort of comes up at some point is that you think about it. Hey, can we actually feed back into that source? You know, so it's a little bit hard maybe to visualize here, but let's try my best. So basically, you're thinking like, can we somehow make it circular or recursive, so to say. And yeah, so keep this idea in mind while we explore expand, because this will become relevant sooner or later. But let's start with the basics. So obviously we start with some kind of source, and let's just first go over some of the basics to know. So we take off, which is an observable creation operator, and basically it allows us to listen to a one-off observable that immediately completes and emits only the value within synchronously. So what we can do here is create our pipe, and I think what's good to do is to sort of divide it up into little pieces. What you see often is sort of these long chains, but I think it's good when sort of talking about the different parts to divide it up a little bit. So then we can log it, or let's actually write down the entire callback. Right, so, well, we know that we have a number, and we know that we have one value. So when we save this, let's see, why is nothing happening? To refresh. Okay, so it was something with stack blitz. So there we are. Yeah, we have logged one here. And when we think of a stream, we tend to think of something where you get multiple values coming in. And as I gave you my example before, it sort of identifies as a single source that streams in, and maybe you combine some sources, but that is ultimately very common. So what you see in many examples, and there's also practical use cases, for example, if you want to create a clock or something like that, is observable interval. So this also comes from RxJS, and the notion here is that you start having these streams, right? And then we can most definitely take that stream and take its value, let's just say it as X for now, and manipulate it. So we can do that with the map operator. Okay, so we have now imported this. So our console is going a little bit crazy. Actually, it has a little bit of a problem with stack blitz. This also doesn't work much, so I just refresh it. So don't pay too much attention to the console until I point at it. Yeah, so we can see that we have taken our original stream and we sort of mapped it to new values. So this is great. The problem here, in some of the other examples, we will see more practical applications, but the issue here is that we are essentially taking the stream and we are massaging it towards new values. You know, we're using these function composition to create new value, but we're not inherently changing the values that flow from here. And so this interval, the way that I like to look at it is a set of 0 to infinity, and we have sort of temporal aspect to it, and we have a numerical aspect to it, and we know that we are sort of going in this direction. But what we ultimately do here is we are taking that set and we are changing that set, or sort of put an arrow on that set if you want to think in terms of category theory, and we are taking it and we are pushing it into something quite differently, right? Yeah. So let me just refresh that. Yeah. So the thing that we could ask ourselves is, if we have a set from 0 to infinity, are we maybe better off actually changing the source instead of having to map it? And that's kind of where expand comes in. So expand, first benefit is on this level of actually pushing in a different source. So if we go back to our first example of the immediate source, then we know that we go through the pipe and we complete. But what expand does is that it actually feeds back into itself. So every time it's about to complete, it actually feeds back into its source. So that's a little difficult to understand, but the easiest way to sort of talk about it is maybe just in this way. And please don't look at the console, and I'll make this a little bit bigger. So the easiest way to think about it is maybe like this. Let me take that out. So you think about it like, okay, we are now sort of in this constant loop, never-ending infinite loop, where we get 1 and we return 1, and we start to see this recursive pattern emerge. The problem with this is that this will lock up our runtime completely, because we don't have any sort of scheduling or delaying going on in this notion. But we can of course facilitate that, because now we are changing this source, so we can slow down this source with a simple delay. And we could have also used some scheduler for that as well. So let me bring in delay as an operator, and I want to say 0 delay here because I want to show that that is not truly 0. That just looks at what resources are still available and fires as quickly as possible. I think it does also take a scheduler, right? Let's see. Okay, I don't have any IntelliSense. Interesting. What is happening here? Maybe he's locked up a little bit too much. There we are. We are back online. Okay, we don't have any intelligence, but you could probably use the animation scheduler. I don't know by heart what it is, but you can probably put in a scheduler there as well. But yeah, let's put in a more realistic delay, and then becomes a bit more manageable. And we just to refresh this. I think the 0 thing he didn't like that much. Stackblitz runtime is not the most stable one compared to your browser. Okay, there we start to get something. Okay, now we are getting a little bit more into a normal stream. Yeah, so what happens here is that we are constantly returning the stream, but it doesn't mean that we don't have access to our original stream. If you are familiar with things like subjects or behavior subjects, what happens here basically is that we are pushing a value into a subject that listens to itself, kind of. So it's recursive, but the beauty of this is that it's much smaller and you can handle it without creating a side effect. Okay, but that doesn't mean, like I said, that we don't have our x. We still have our number here. So that means that we can obviously just return that one and do our famous +1. So let me refresh that, and now we have essentially created a more dynamic interval, if you will. Okay. So now I hope you start to see that this pattern emerges of a stream actually being able to feed back into itself. And that comes with some powerful notions. So let's look at a practical example of this. So probably the example that I like the most is when you have some database. Let's make it into an array with some objects in it. And let's say that these objects kind of represent pages. So page 1, and we have some data in that page, let's say user chain, and we have next page, and the next page is 2. Okay. So then we take that object, let's give a bit more space here. Let's actually delay this by a little bit more so we are not bothered by it. So yeah, so let's give this a little bit more space and build out our fake database a bit further. So every time there's a next page of this object until we get to the end. So now that we have created our source as sort of a hard-coded value, we can assign that to a function. So we say that get fake data, and then we look it up by page number, which is a number. And then we return fake database, where we find the element, let's say for now, where the page is equal to the page number. And then in order to make it an observable, we can just wrap it in off. And in order to simulate some realistic or more realistic database, we can delay it by half a second. Okay. So what we now have is basically a dynamic observable. This observable can bear in the value of page 1. And let me say that we have Jan and Joe and Peter and Johnny and final. Okay. So now we know that this is a dynamic observable that could be either one of these things. So the way that we can use that is actually we still have to think of a source, because our expand operator needs to start with some kind of starting ask. So yeah, the best thing to do is to replace this one, get fake data, and maybe just request page 1 for now. There we are. And the source, for now we can just say that the source is of 1, just to make it happy. So yeah, what we see now is that we are constantly asking for page 1. But the beauty is that we can obviously start requesting different pages. So we can most certainly say that we want x plus 1, and then we sort of get it like that. The problem right now is that we are not changing the source observable. So we are returning a fake data off, but we are not actually reading any value, so we are getting undefined. So the way that we can solve that is to set the object of this one, which is now the primitive, similar to the shape of what we're asking. And I'm sure it will get clear once we start to do it. So we know that we have a page, which we can sort of initially set to 0, and we have a next page, which we can initially set to 1. And then in our expand, we have these to work with. So now what we can do is we can say that we want our x dot next page, basically. So that means that our first next page is 1 to start it off with, and then it sort of works its way towards all the next ones. So let's see how that works. Let me just, yeah, so now you can see that we are getting all the pages, and in the end we are obviously searching with null for next page, and yeah, that's not gonna work. So we need to find some way to handle this logic where we say, okay, as soon as it's null, we either stop it or we return something different. And there are several different ways to approach this, but one maybe quite informed way is to think about another operator called empty, or actually it's not an operator, it's a observable creation, because what it essentially does is it creates an observable that immediately completes. So very similar to off1, but the difference is that it bears no value in it, and that way it just completes right away. So because we now have this expand operator, we can add dynamics to it, because we don't have to always ask for get fake data. Depending on the situation that we are in, we can actually return just simply empty. And when we do that, we basically immediately complete. So for that to become valuable, we can say that we want something with our x. Let's say we want our x.next page to not be null, right? Because that's kind of what we what we're saying is that whenever this has some value, we definitely would like to fire off getting fake data. And if we don't, that's when we want to say empty, right? So what you see now is that we are recursively updating the input source observable to be whatever the next page is. So we start with 0, and then we sort of work our way down. Of course, in an application, we are not interested in this 0 page, because it was only there to fire off the expand recursion. So what we can do there is simply to say skip 1, right? Because we essentially want to skip the first one. So yeah, the way we can do that is by writing out this. Let's just put it all on a slightly better way. So we put it on one line like that, and then we say skip 1. So skip is also an operator. And now you can see that we are getting exactly back what we are expecting. So the beauty about expand is that obviously when we have more pages here, it will just start to continue to get more pages, right? So if we have 5, 6, 7, 8, and we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And let me just refresh this one. So basically, expand is a very powerful operator that can really help you to write side effect free code using observable streams. And more importantly, it changes your notion of a stream being a one-way operation into something that can actually feed back into itself. I think that opens a lot of doors. So I have used this for things like creating sort of dynamic animations where you want something to animate until a certain condition is met. And there are definitely different ways to do it, but I think expand, once it starts to click, it becomes a pretty essential part of your toolkit in RxJS. So I hope this video and this style of sort of working towards the solution helped. And feel free to reach out if there are any questions about expand, and I'll be sure to create some more of these videos explaining different operators or different principles of RxJS in the future. Thank you so much.